One time he locked me inside a container with kids. Real kids. Some were sick, some crying, some didn't even speak English. The youngest were maybe 5 or 6. They just sat there, scared, holding on to each other. No one spoke. No one moved. We all stared, frozen. I saw babies wrapped in blankets, too weak to cry. Children from Mexico, from Africa. And there were more trucks. A lot more. I was terrified. And I'll never forget their faces.
Sometimes we think we've left everything behind, that the ghosts of the past fade with the years. But life has a cruel way of reminding you that no, some doors never completely close. I discovered this one random night, many years after hanging up the keys to the truck. For more than 3 decades I was a truck driver. I crisscrossed the country as if it were my backyard. At first I loved it. Every trip was an adventure. I checked the truck from top to bottom before each route. I knew what I was hauling, not out of obligation but because I needed to be in control. The road was uncertain, but my load didn't have to be. Over time, all that changed. Maybe it was loneliness or weariness. Maybe it was just routine. I stopped worrying about the details. I no longer asked what was in the trailer. I just wanted to complete the trip and go home. So the years passed until retirement arrived. I thought I was done with that world. I imagined quiet afternoons with my family, watching my grandchildren grow up. But life, as I said, has its own agenda. One night, while I was flipping channels without interest, my phone rang. It was my old manager. We hadn't spoken since I retired. Seeing his name, I felt a chill. I hesitated to answer, but I did. His voice was calm, but laced with an urgency that unsettled me. He offered me a job, 2 deliveries. Simple, he said. I laughed. Why was he looking for me? I was already out. Then he mentioned the pay, $1 million, half before the first trip, the other half after the second. My heart stopped. In all my years I'd never heard a figure like that. I told him no, that I was retired, that I didn't need the stress. But he insisted. He said the client was someone important. Diddy. I'm not a fan of celebrities. I've never been interested in them. But that sum, it was too much to ignore. I accepted. Against my instinct. Against my logic. I agreed. 2 days later, I showed up at a facility in Detroit. In front of me was an imposing truck, already loaded. My traveling companion was a young man in his 30s, serious and quiet. We barely exchanged names when my former manager pulled me aside to explain the rule. The first was clear and disconcerting. Under no circumstances were we allowed to open the trailer. No looking, no prying, no stopping to check. He repeated it several times, with a seriousness I'd never heard before. The second rule was even stranger. 2 cars would escort us the entire way, 1 in front, 1 in back. And the third, we would hand over our phones to the security team. I asked what was all the mystery about. He simply shrugged. It's Diddy. He doesn't want any distraction. They're paying you a lot. Follow the rules. I swallowed, handed over my phone, climbed into the truck, and we began the journey. The first few hours were peaceful. I played classic rock to stay awake. The young co-pilot stared out the window, oblivious to everything. But after a few hours I began to hear something. At first it was a murmur, a faint thump from the trailer. I thought it was the cargo moving, but it had a rhythm, like a pattern. Thumps that didn't feel like objects, but something alive. A chill ran through me. At the first stop to change drivers, I mentioned it to him. His face hardened. I heard it too, he admitted. But don't think too much about it. These things happen on the road. It didn't reassure me. I ate a quick meal and tried to sleep in the cab, but the sound persisted, echoing in my mind like a haunting sound. At dawn, we arrived at our destination, a monumental mansion, guarded like a fortress. Armed guards ordered us to get out. Another team took the truck and drove it to the loading dock. We couldn't accompany them. We could only wait. The air was thick, and the silence as thick as lead. My curiosity became unbearable. I asked one of the guards to use the bathroom. At first he refused, but after some insistence he agreed. He escorted me inside the mansion. Luxurious, yes, but soulless, cold, like a museum without visitors. In the bathroom I noticed a small window in the corner. I peeked cautiously, and saw something that made my blood run cold. Two guards were carrying a huge container, secured with an industrial padlock. Up to that point, everything could be explained. But then I heard it again. The same sound. Banging. Not loose boxes. They were rhythmic. Frantic. Like someone trapped inside trying to get out. My chest tightened. I gasped for air. That thing in the trailer. It wasn't just a load. Someone or something was in there. Struggling. Swallowing nervously, I turned my head and noticed something even more disturbing. A surveillance camera, right above me in the bathroom. It wasn't large, nor very visible. But there it was, pointing directly at me. My mind started racing. Who installs cameras in a bathroom? What kind of person needs to monitor even the most intimate moments? I went outside and confronted the guard. I asked him about the camera. He laughed. "It doesn't work," he said. But something about his laughter stopped me in my tracks. There was no empathy, no humanity. I went back outside. The air seemed heavier. I shared what I saw with my partner. His face turned pale. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Before I could say anything else, a guard approached us and returned the truck to us. We were to be taken to another facility. They handed us sealed envelopes, $500,000 each. I'd never held so much money in my hands before. But its weight was different. As if instead of bills, I was carrying stones. Stones soaked with guilt, with questions, with something I knew I shouldn't have touched. The second part of the job seemed simple. Pick up another truck from a nearby warehouse, take it back to the mansion, and receive the other half of the payment. Easy. But the unease wouldn't go away. It was like an invisible thorn stuck in my neck. Before continuing, if you've made it this far, please subscribe to the channel. You won't find these kinds of stories anywhere else. And with just one click, you'll help me continue telling them. Leave a comment with what you would do in my place. Would you continue with the second trip or run away without looking back? The drive to the facility was silent. A silence that wasn't peaceful, but pressure. I could hear every breath, every creak of the seat, every thought crashing through my mind. My companion, who had previously seemed indifferent, now seemed agitated. His eyes darted from the rearview mirror to the road, relentlessly, as if he expected something, at any moment, to catch up with us. The escort cars from the first trip were still with us, one in front, one behind. Identical black vehicles, with tinted windows, that revealed nothing. Their presence, far from giving us security, felt like a moving prison. Surveillance disguised as protection. When we arrived at the facility, the second truck was already waiting for us. Impeccable. Same size, same color, same dense silence. I stared at it for a few seconds, and a strange feeling ran down my spine. It was as if the truck was breathing. A guard wordlessly handed us the keys. His hand was gloved, but I felt the cold of his touch. Looking into his eyes, I saw nothing. No hostility, no kindness, just absolute emptiness. Something that told me, wordlessly, that if I crossed a certain line, there would be no turning back. My partner took the first shift. I lay down on the back bunk, pretending to rest. But I couldn't sleep. We'd barely gone a few kilometers when the sounds started again. But this time they weren't whispers. They were loud, desperate knocks. Like someone trapped in a nightmare they were trying to escape. And then, scream. They weren't imaginary. They weren't the sounds of the road. They were human voices, muffled, trapped, crying for help. I sat up, alarmed. I asked my partner if he heard it. He didn't look at me. He just said, "Don't ask questions." That was the deal. We get paid not to look, not to know. And at that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a job. It was a pact, a tacit agreement with something dark. And we, for money, had agreed. The rest of the journey was a silent hell. The bangs didn't stop. The screams came and went, as if the souls inside the trailer were exhausted and regaining strength in a tortuous cycle. And yet the escort cars remained unperturbed, without accelerating, without braking, without reacting, as if to them, these sounds were normal. I looked in the side mirror, trying to capture something in the vehicles around us. Nothing. Not a shadow. Not a face, not a gesture, that would give me any humanity. Everything was mechanical, choreographed, as if every second of this transport was pre-scripted. My partner continued driving, gripping the wheel. I could see his knuckles turning white. At some point, as the sky turned red from the setting sun, I told him we had to stop, that we couldn't keep pretending we didn't hear anything. No, he said, without taking his eyes off the road. You don't realize, we're no longer in control. We never were. That no longer struck a chord with me, because it implied that at some point, we were. That at some point in this process, we crossed an invisible line. Once you cross it, you no longer decide anything. You just obey. We arrived at the mansion just as dusk fell. The lights came on one by one, like eyes watching us. The gate opened without anyone touching it. It was as if everything was programmed for our arrival. They made us get out. Again, a team took the truck and drove it to the loading. They ordered us to wait outside. But this time, something was different. I no longer felt just discomfort. I felt fear. A raw, formless, but absolute fear. The minutes stretched like hours. We didn't speak. We just stared into space. And then one of the guards appeared. He was carrying 2 envelopes. He held them out with the same coldness as before. Inside, the other $500,000. $1 million in total. But the money didn't weigh like before. It weighed more. Because now I knew I'd earned it. Transporting something that shouldn't be moved. Something that shouldn't exist. I stared at that envelope. It was thick, new, unmarked bills, as if they'd never passed through human hands. My partner put it away quickly, without saying a word. But I couldn't move. I felt like the envelope was burning my finger, as if it carried with it all the pain and mystery we dragged along those miles of asphalt. I looked toward the mansion. The windows were dark, but I knew someone, or something was watching us. There was an energy in that place that couldn't be explained. Something that made you feel insignificant, like a replaceable piece in a game you'd never understand. That night, I didn't sleep. I was back home, surrounded by silence, with my family upstairs, and yet I couldn't stop thinking about those screams, in the cameras inside the bathroom, in the guards who seemed more like robots than people, and above all in whatever we had transported. I tried to convince myself that it was all legal, that it was just rich people stuff, celebrity eccentricities, but deep down, something told me no, that we had been part of something much darker, something that didn't want to come to light. Days passed. They called me several more times offering new jobs, more money, more deliveries. This time, even on private flights. I always said no, until they stopped calling, and then the visits began. Cars parked in front of my house, engines running for hours, voiceless calls on the other end of the line, an envelope with photos of my grandson leaving school, all in silence, all like a warning. That's when I knew there was no way out. That million wasn't a payment, it was the price of my silence. And if you've made it this far, let me tell you something. The truth sometimes doesn't set you free. Sometimes it locks you away. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue learning stories that not everyone dares to tell. Share this video if you've ever felt like something doesn't fit with the world around you. Your support is the only thing that allows us to continue revealing what others prefer to keep quiet. Over time, I tried to move on with my life, but some things can't be buried. The nightmares started a few weeks after the second trip. They weren't vague dreams. They were exact visions. The screams, the bangs, the expressionless faces of the guards. Sometimes I woke up with the feeling that someone was standing at the foot of my bed, watching me in the dark. My wife noticed something wasn't right. I told her it was things from the past, memories of the journey, of the accumulated stress. I lied. I couldn't tell her the truth. How could I explain that a simple trip had left such deep scars? How could I talk about something I couldn't fully understand? One night, while checking my mailbox, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, an address, a date, and a sentence. Remember what you transported. I couldn't ignore it. Something inside me knew that if I didn't go, things would get worse. When I arrived at the address, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, I found a figure waiting in the shadows. He didn't say his name. He just handed me a small wooden box. "This is yours," he said. "You had it in the cabin, and you didn't see." The box was light, but when I opened it, I felt the world become heavier. Inside was a photograph. It was a grainy black and white image. It showed the interior of the trailer. Someone, a naked, huddled human figure, was standing against one of the metal walls. Their eyes, even from the photo, seemed to scream. I slammed the box shut. "What is this?" I asked. The man just smiled. "The truth isn't for everyone, but it belongs to you now." I returned home, shaking. The box is still there, at the bottom of a drawer. I haven't opened it again, but every night, when I turn off the lights, I swear I can hear the same knocking in my mind, or on the walls. After that night, something changed in me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the certainty that I had crossed an invisible line, a line that separates those who live in ignorance from those who have seen what they shouldn't have. And the worst part is that once you cross it, you can't go back. I tried to lead my normal life, gardening, playing with my grandchildren, accompanying my wife to the market. But every peaceful moment was invaded by dark thoughts, by unanswered questions. Who was in that trailer? What was Diddy doing with them? Why so much secrecy? And why did they choose us? I started investigating. Not on the internet, of course. That kind of thing isn't on Google. I searched anonymous forums, contacted old roadies, guys who had once worked on oddball deliveries, well paid, with hush contracts. Most of them hung up on me. One, however, agreed to talk if I left my cell phone at home, and met him in a downtown restaurant at noon, with a lot of people. His name was Marcos, or so he told me. He was a thin guy, with eyes lit by something more than caffeine. He had made 3 deliveries for special clients, as they were called, all famous millionaires, the kind who run the world without you even noticing. He looked me in the eye as he said, "None of us knew exactly what we were carrying, but we all felt it wasn't merchandise. It was meat, but not the kind you buy in butcher shops." I swallowed. I asked him if he thought they were people. He nodded, but without saying a word, just with his eyes. Once he added, "One of the trucks overturned. They said it was the weather, but the one driving disappeared. He was never heard from again." We paid the bill. He gave me a folded piece of paper before leaving. "If you ever need to disappear, call that number." But only once. I kept the note like a talisman, though I didn't know if it would protect me or sink me further. From that day on, I began to see signs everywhere. A black car parked in front of the store. A man wearing sunglasses standing too long on the corner. Voiceless calls, always at 3:17 a.m. What had once seemed like paranoia was now surveillance, and I didn't know if it was a warning or a reminder. I didn't tell my family anything. I could. How do you explain to your wife that a billionaire's mansion holds secrets that could shake entire governments? How do you tell your grandchildren that their grandfather brought more than just merchandise, that he transported silence, fear, and perhaps human lives? One night, I decided to return to the place where it all began, the facility in Detroit. I went with no hope of finding answers, but with a visceral need to face the place that changed me forever. Upon arriving, the first thing I noticed was the emptiness. The gates were locked with rusty chains, and the company sign had been torn off, leaving only a neater rectangle on the dusty facade. The following weeks were a slow descent into something I couldn't name. It wasn't just guilt, nor just fear. It was as if I'd been ripped from ordinary reality and thrust into a parallel dimension, one where the rules I knew no longer applied. I began to have bouts of anxiety. I would lock myself in my room for hours, mentally replaying every mile of the journey, every word from the manager, every glance from the escorts. One day I decided to look for the serial number I'd found. I entered it into freight and transport databases, customs databases, even clandestine logistics forums. Nothing. Silence. Until one morning, I received a message from an anonymous profile. "We know what you saw. Don't continue." The message deleted itself. I closed my laptop with trembling hands. I didn't sleep that night, and the next day, I confirmed it. There were cameras installed near my house. New ones, more discreet. I put up thick curtains. I turned off the Wi-Fi. I isolated myself, but the isolation only made the thoughts grow. I began to remember details I'd ignored at the time. The metallic smell coming from the trailer, the trembling in the guard's hands when he handed us the first payment, The way my partner didn't look at me directly after the second trip, it all made sense, but it wasn't the kind of sense you want to find. It was a truth that breaks you inside. I thought about returning the money, about turning it over to the police, but what would I tell them? That I transported something I felt was human, that I saw a sealed container, a photo. There was no proof, only sensations, only memories tainted by fear, and fear, I realized too late, is a stronger prison than any cell. The pressure grew so much that I ended up speaking to a priest. I'm not particularly religious, but I needed to say it out loud. We went for a walk, away from everything, along a path behind the church. I told him everything, from the manager's call to the photograph. He didn't interrupt me once. Finally he stopped, looked at me with tired eyes, and said, "You were the vehicle, not the culprit." But when evil is carried, even if you don't understand it, something remains inside. I asked him what I should do. He looked at me and, in an even lower voice, said, "Sometimes the only thing left is not to repeat the past." I left there with a kind of peace, but a fragile peace, like glass in a storm. I decided to burn the box. I climbed a hill and lit it in a makeshift bonfire. The flames engulfed it, and for a second, I swore I heard a sigh escape the fire. From that day on, the calls stopped. No one else parked in front of my house. No one else followed me. But peace came at a price. The certainty that my silence wasn't freedom, it was complicity. And yet, time, that slow anesthetic, began to soften the wounds. Months passed, then a year, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd gotten over it, until I received a letter. No return address, no branding, just a piece of paper, with a handwritten sentence, "There's another trip pending." The envelope had no other information, no date, no place, just that sent. As if it were enough to destabilize everything I'd tried to piece together, the nightmares returned. Even worse, visions during the day, voices in places where no one was, knocks on my door that disappeared when I opened it. I began to write everything down, every memory, every detail of the trip, every face, every word. Maybe if I documented it, if I left a record, someone in the future would know what happened. Maybe someone else could do something. I isolated myself even more, not out of fear of them, but out of fear of myself. I felt like I wasn't the same man anymore, that I'd brought something back with me from that trip, something that wouldn't leave me. It wasn't physical, it was like a shadow behind my eyes. One day I decided to visit my former manager. I wanted answers, to know why he chose me, how he came into contact with that network. But his house was abandoned. Neighbors said he'd disappeared months ago. His mailbox was overflowing with letters. His car was still in the garage. No one knew anything else. I returned home with a terrifying feeling. I was alone, alone with a memory that would haunt me for the rest of my life, and wondering how many others had made that same journey, without returning. That's when I decided to record this story, not to seek fame, or to cause scandal, but because I need someone out there to know the truth, that the things we take for granted, that the normality we live in, is sustained by very dark silences. I don't know who's watching me now. I don't know if this story will survive, but if it does, and if you're listening to this, remember one thing: not everything paid for with money is legal, and not everything transported in silence should be transported. I know many won't believe me. They'll think this is fiction, paranoia, or poorly processed trauma, and maybe it is, maybe, but tell me, if you had the chance to win $1 million for not asking questions, would you accept? I did, and I regret it every day. This will be my last testimony. After this, I disappear, not out of cowardice, but out of necessity. But if one day someone offers you a lot of money to keep your mouth shut, remember this: sometimes the price of silence is your soul. I've left everything ready. This recording, these words, are my farewell to the world I knew. If anyone else has gone through something similar, if you heard noises where there shouldn't have been noises, if you were part of something that made you tremble inside, but you accepted, because the money justified everything, I understand. But understand this: money doesn't erase what you saw. It doesn't erase what you did. It only buries it, and what's buried always finds a way to surface. Sometimes in the form of nightmares, sometimes in the form of unsigned letters, sometimes in the form of a new assignment. I'll never know for sure what we were carrying, if they were people, if they were victims, if they were experiments. I only know that they were alive, that they were fighting, that they were screaming, and that we kept driving.
And if you're listening to this, you're probably already close to a similar limit. Maybe you're about to make a life-changing decision. Maybe someone has already knocked on your door with an offer that sounds too good to be true. Don't do it. Don't drive without knowing what you're carrying. Don't trade your conscience for papers, because when it's all over and you're alone with the silence, that will be the most deafening sound of your life. And if you ever hear knocking behind a closed door, remember, some things aren't meant to be ignored, because what I gave up in that mansion, as a retired truck driver, will haunt me until the end of my days, and now it will haunt you too.